Just curious, what device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
They say holidays bring people together, but no one ever talks about how they can also rip people apart in ways that are quiet, cold, and devastatingly permanent. It was a Thursday afternoon, just 2 weeks before Christmas, and I was standing in line at Target with a cart full of wrapping paper, holiday candles, and a little Lego set I'd picked out for my nephew, the one who still called me JoJo, even though he was pushing 12 and already acting like a mini version of his father. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, and I saw my brother's name pop up, Kevin. I answered with that automatic, cheerful voice we all put on for family during the holidays, expecting some last-minute shopping question or maybe a funny story about his kids. Instead, what I got was a tight, awkward pause, followed by a sentence that changed everything. "Hey, so about Christmas, this year we're doing something a little different." He went on to explain that the family dinner at Mom's house was going to be a bit more curated, his exact word, like they were assembling a guest list for a goddamn corporate gala. "You know," he added with a chuckle that wasn't quite a laugh, "just close family, people who've kind of, made it." And just like that, I wasn't invited. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just looked down at the roll of red ribbon in my cart and tried to make sense of what he'd said. I wanted to believe I'd misunderstood. Maybe I misheard. But I hadn't. He meant it. I wasn't on the list because, in his eyes, I hadn't made it. Never mind that I'd kept their lights on for 2 winters in a row. Never mind that I paid half their mortgage for 8 months after Kevin lost his job and refused to tell Mom he couldn't support his family. Never mind that I skipped 2 years of vacations and a car I desperately needed, just so my niece could have that ridiculous horseback riding summer camp she wouldn't shut up about. None of that made me family in the eyes of my brother, because I didn't wear it on my sleeve, or post about it online, or have the kind of life that looked impressive in Christmas photos. So I smiled, right there in the Target line, while a woman behind me tried to wrangle her screaming toddler, and a tired old man ahead of me grumbled about prices. I smiled and said, "No problem at all, Kev. Totally get it." My voice didn't crack, my hands didn't shake. I kept it even, polite, sweet as sugar, because that's what women like me are trained to do. Swallow it, smile through it, don't make a scene. But inside, something had started burning. I'd love to ask you, if your own family told you that you weren't good enough to sit at the same table on Christmas Day, would you still send their kids presents? Would you still keep paying their bills? Or would you finally let them see what life looks like without your help? I went home that night and poured myself a glass of wine. Not one of the good ones, just the kind I'd picked up because it was on sale and I didn't think I deserved better. I sat at my kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every single account I had connected to their lives. There was the auto payment for Kevin's car lease, canceled. The contribution I made to their grocery delivery subscription, removed. I scrolled through old emails until I found the monthly tuition payment I'd been making toward my niece's after-school program, discontinued. No drama, no emails, no warnings, just a few quiet clicks. Over the next few days, the silence from their end was deafening. No calls, no texts. Just that one conversation, like it had never happened. Like I hadn't been written off as a charity case who didn't fit the image of what the new family Christmas was supposed to look like. "People who've made it," he said. I kept hearing those words in my head, over and over again, like an echo bouncing off every decision I had made in the past 10 years. Every sacrifice, every missed opportunity, every quiet moment where I put their needs ahead of my own. I thought about the time I paid their electric bill with the bonus I got from staying late at work every night for 3 months straight. I thought about the year I covered their rent because Kevin's wife, Melissa, wanted to take a break from working to focus on her mental health. And I thought about how not once, not even once, did any of them ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I wanted to be part of something. I was useful. That was my role, the safety net, the backup generator, and once they didn't need the light, they didn't even bother to say thank you before flipping the switch off. A week passed, then another. The group text thread that used to buzz with plans and memes and guilt-tripped RSVPs went dead silent. I'd been quietly erased, Not out of malice, but worse, out of convenience. And still I said nothing, because saying something meant I cared. And if they wanted to play the image game, if they wanted to hold their heads high at that perfectly curated Christmas dinner and pretend everything was fine, then fine. Let them do it without the woman who made sure their damn roof didn't cave in. What none of them realized, not then at least, was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I wasn't cutting them off out of spite. I was giving them the opportunity to show me who they really were when they had to stand on their own. And I had a feeling the picture wouldn't be quite as shiny without me behind the scenes. On Christmas Eve, while Kevin's family posed for photos in coordinated sweaters and forced smiles, I sat on my porch with a blanket wrapped around me and a whiskey in my hand, watching the snow fall and wondering how long before the cracks in their perfect picture started to show. It didn't take long, barely 5 days after Christmas morning, for the silence to break, but not in the way you might expect. Not with an apology or a sheepish attempt to smooth things over, not even with the kind of passive-aggressive holiday card that families sometimes send when they want to pretend nothing bad ever happened but still can't quite look you in the eye. No, it started with a single text message from Melissa, my sister-in-law, who I hadn't heard from since early November, back when she had casually asked if I could spot them just one more time so the kids could have a proper Thanksgiving dinner. Her words, not mine. And I had, like always, said yes without even hesitating. The message wasn't warm or thankful, not even vaguely polite. It was short, tight, and laced with that brand of suburban panic that leaks through when things stop running smoothly. It said, "Hey Joanna, did you happen to cancel the grocery account? We can't log in and the payment bounced." I stared at it for a moment, letting the weight of it settle, not because the question was unexpected, but because it was asked with such casual entitlement, like I was an IT department for their lives, as if my only role was to fix the machine when the gears stopped turning. There was no "hope you're well," no "sorry about Christmas," no acknowledgement of what had gone down, just a cold transactional request for service, like I was a number on a spreadsheet that had gone missing. I didn't reply right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I needed a moment to make sure I could send it without the shaking hands that used to follow me every time I put their needs ahead of mine. In the background, I could hear the sound of my own dishwasher humming, the same one I had been saving to replace for the past 2 years, the one that worked only when I propped the door with a chair and whispered a prayer into its rusty insides. I thought about how many times I had let my own needs slide while I covered theirs, and I realized I didn't owe them a damn explanation. I replied with 4 words. Not my account anymore. That was it. No follow-up, no offer to help troubleshoot. And as I hit send, I felt something in my chest uncoil, something that had been twisted and knotted for so long I didn't even remember what peace felt like, until I finally gave myself permission to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice if I was gone. Over the next 48 hours, it started to unravel. Kevin didn't text right away, which surprised me, because he was always the first to react when things didn't go his way, always the loudest voice in the room when it came to assigning blame, always the one to throw out phrases like, "You don't understand what it's like," or "Some of us have real responsibilities," as if I had never been responsible for anything in my life. But when he did finally reach out, it wasn't with anger. It was confusion disguised as calm. "Hey, not sure what's going on with the rent payment. We got a notice." That was all he wrote. Not "thanks for the help all year," not "can we talk?" Just a quiet nudge, as if the machine had glitched and he was waiting for me to reboot it. I didn't answer that one either. By the end of the week, Melissa called. Not a text this time. A real phone call, one I let go to voicemail because I didn't trust myself not to scream. Her voice, which had always been smooth and a little too sweet, like frosting covering a cake that had already started to rot, cracked in the middle when she said, "Joanna, I know things have been weird lately, but the kids are really struggling, and we could use your help just until things get back on track." And there it was, the plea, the return to the well, the moment they realized the faucet had been turned off, and suddenly the generosity they took for granted had a price they never considered. But even then, even with the hint of desperation bleeding through her words, there was no apology, no self-awareness, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I listened to that voicemail twice, then I deleted it. Somewhere between my quiet rebellion and their growing panic, Christmas had lost its shine. The pictures they posted on Facebook, staged, bright, perfectly filtered, began to look strained. You could see it if you knew where to look. Kevin's stiff shoulders, Melissa's forced smile, the way the kids looked slightly out of frame, like they'd rather be anywhere else. I watched from a distance, not out of cruelty, but out of curiosity, like an anthropologist studying a species that didn't realize the ecosystem had changed. And all the while, I kept thinking back to the years I had spent propping them up, the time I paid the deductible for their son's ER visit when he broke his arm at soccer, the school supplies I bought every August, the whispered Venmo transfers after they forgot to buy a birthday cake for their daughter because they were behind on bills. None of those moments had earned me a seat at the Christmas table. None of those sacrifices had bought me the right to be considered one of them. I was a utility, not a sister. And now that the utility had shut down, the system was starting to fail, slowly, glitch by glitch, until eventually something was going to break for real. I poured myself another glass of wine that Friday night and sat by my window, watching the wind whip the last of the holiday lights off the neighbor's roof. And I thought, not for the first time, maybe what they miss isn't me. Maybe it's the version of me that paid their bills, swallowed her pride, and kept the whole damn machine running without asking for thanks. And maybe, just maybe, it's time they learned to miss something else entirely. The woman who stopped pretending she didn't matter just because they told her so. By the middle of January, barely 3 weeks after their picture-perfect Christmas wrapped in curated smugness and selective invitations, the cracks that had begun as hairline fractures in Kevin's carefully constructed life widened into something much more visible, much more desperate, and undeniably more chaotic, like watching a dam groan under pressure. Before the first explosion of water shoots through, and there's nothing anyone can do but step back and watch the collapse. It began with small things, missed appointments, late pickups, forgotten bills, the kind of domestic slippage that happens when people have been floating for so long on someone else's lifeline that they forget how to paddle when it disappears. Except this time, there was no backup plan, no whispered text message with a quick fix, no hidden deposit quietly showing up just in time. This time, it was all on them, and I wasn't going to rescue them. The first real sign that things were spiraling came through a third party, not even from Kevin himself, which in retrospect should have made me feel smug, vindicated even. But all I felt was a heavy sort of tiredness that settled in the bones. That feeling you get when you've seen a storm coming for years, but no one believed you until the windows blew out. I ran into Rachel, a mutual acquaintance from our hometown, in the grocery store. She didn't recognize me at first. I'd lost some weight, changed my hair, and more importantly, started carrying myself differently. Like someone who didn't owe the world a damn thing anymore. She approached me cautiously, like someone circling an open wound, then dropped the line that shifted something in my gut. "Hey, I heard Kevin's having a rough time at work. Is everything okay?" I didn't respond immediately, because what could I possibly say to that? That the same brother who'd excluded me from Christmas on the basis of some imaginary hierarchy of success was now fumbling to keep his job because the very stability he pretended to own had always secretly been mine. That the man who once told me I should be more ambitious was now being investigated at his firm for poor performance and attendance because he'd been spending his mornings dealing with unpaid bills, childcare chaos, and a mortgage company that had finally stopped accepting excuses. That he'd called our mother the week before, not to confess, not to come clean, but to hint, in the vaguest terms, that maybe someone had sabotaged him. I nodded politely to Rachel and told her I hadn't heard much, then quickly paid for my groceries and left, because what I really wanted to do was scream. Not in anger, but in disbelief that even now, even as the world he built on my sacrifice began to tremble, he couldn't bring himself to admit that maybe, just maybe, the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant had been the foundation all along. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old journals, pages filled with late-night thoughts, receipts tucked between covers like trophies, memories inked in frustration, exhaustion, and unspoken grief. I found an entry from 3 years ago, written after I canceled my birthday dinner because Kevin had called last minute in a panic, saying they were about to lose their car and needed help immediately. I had sent the money without hesitation, missed the one night a year that belonged to me, and never even got a thank you. The next day, he posted photos of the kids at a water park, with a caption about spontaneous joy. I remember staring at the screen, wondering how someone could take so much and still act like they were giving. Now, 3 years later, Kevin was unraveling in slow motion, and I wasn't lifting a finger. Not because I didn't care. God help me, I still cared more than I should have. But because I finally understood that care without boundaries is not love. It's a prison with invisible walls. And I had lived in that prison long enough. Melissa called again, 3 missed calls in a row, followed by a voicemail so frantic I had to sit down to listen. Her voice was sharp, panicked, brittle in a way that only happens when someone realizes the safety net has disappeared and the fall is longer than they imagined. She said Kevin had missed a second performance review, that their youngest had been pulled from her after-school program due to non-payment, and that she wasn't sure how long they could keep this going. Then, as if remembering who she was speaking to, her voice changed, turned cold, clipped, and laced with a bitterness that no longer hid behind civility. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've made your point. Congratulations." I didn't call back. Instead, I made myself a quiet dinner, sat at my tiny kitchen table with the lights low, and my feet tucked beneath me, and let myself feel something I hadn't in years. The strange, uneasy calm of watching chaos I didn't cause, didn't control, and wouldn't fix. It was terrifying in a way, to release control over people you've been protecting for so long, but it was also liberating. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next emergency. I wasn't bracing for the phone to ring or calculating which bill I could cover without going under myself. I was just existing, quietly, peacefully, deliberately. And still, a voice in the back of my mind whispered the question I couldn't quite shake. Did I go too far? Was this justice or just cruelty wearing a different dress? But even as I wrestled with those doubts, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I had warned them with my silence, long before I withdrew my money. I had told them with every quiet sacrifice that they mattered, that I was holding them up, that my love was unconditional. They chose not to hear it. They chose to believe I would always be there. Now they were learning what life looked like without me. And the truth was, it wasn't my job to save them anymore. By the time February rolled in like a wet gray sponge pressed hard against every surface of the calendar, the fallout had begun to shift from quiet unraveling to open hostility, and what started as confusion and veiled desperation for my brother's family curdled quickly into something far more vicious, something laced with spite and cowardice, and that kind of petty vindictiveness that only comes from people who know they've lost the upper hand but would rather scorch the earth than admit they needed you in the first place. And so it was that one afternoon, as I sat in my living room, wrapped in a throw blanket, with a lukewarm mug of coffee and a dog-eared novel in my lap, I opened my phone to find a Facebook notification that felt like a punch directly to the throat. Kevin had tagged me in a post, the first time he had publicly acknowledged me in months, and it wasn't a birthday shout-out or a memory from better days. It was a long, carefully worded rant about family betrayal. I clicked the post, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with a nauseating mix of disbelief and rage. And there it was, a neat little essay on how some people pretend to be supportive, but reveal their true colors when the holidays roll around. How financial blackmail isn't love, and how being family means showing up, not throwing money around and calling it care. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, written in that faux humble tone that toxic people use when they want to paint themselves as victims without actually admitting any wrongdoing. And there, at the end, a cherry on top of his emotional garbage sundae, he wrote, "It's sad when your own sister would rather punish your kids than be part of their lives. We tried. We included her. She chose distance." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, rereading that final line, letting it settle into my skin like an old bruise coming back to the surface. Included me? He had excluded me explicitly, told me I wasn't invited to Christmas because it was only for people who'd made it. And now he was rewriting history in real time, turning himself into the wounded brother and casting me, the woman who paid his rent, clothed his kids, and sacrificed years of her life, as the cold-hearted villain who walked away without warning. The comments rolled in fast. Some from people who didn't know the full story, offering generic sympathy or platitudes about how family is hard, but others, people we'd grown up with, cousins we saw at weddings and funerals, mutual friends from town, chimed in with passive-aggressive jabs. "Wow, I can't believe she'd do that to you," one wrote. "You and Melissa have always been so generous with your love," said another. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. Not because it was true, but because Kevin was louder, more visible, and better at playing the part of the wounded parent. I didn't respond, not publicly. I didn't post my own counter-expose or drop a list of receipts or screenshots to prove my side. I didn't air my pain for the digital world to consume. But what I did do, and I won't pretend it was noble, was begin to burn what little was left. I went through my contacts, removed every mutual friend who had liked his post, unfollowed every cousin who had commented without reaching out to ask if I was okay, blocked Melissa's sister who had sent me a direct message that began with, "Not to take sides, but," because taking sides is exactly what that kind of sentence always means. And then, just as I was about to put my phone away and return to the quiet I'd been trying to build, a text buzzed in, this time from my mother, a woman who had spent the better part of her life straddling the line between peacekeeping and willful ignorance, whose first instinct in any family crisis was to ask what I had done to provoke it. Her message was short, passive, and drenched in that particular brand of maternal guilt that's too subtle to fight directly. "He's your brother. I don't understand how you two let it get this far." I didn't even have the strength to reply, because the truth was, we hadn't let it get this far. Kevin had pushed it there, slowly and deliberately, through years of taking without gratitude, demanding without humility, and punishing anyone who failed to play along. And I had gone along willingly, out of loyalty, out of love, out of that deeply ingrained belief that family was something you preserved at all costs, until I realized that the cost was myself. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at a photograph on my dresser from 10 years ago, the last Christmas where we all looked genuinely happy. Kevin had his arm around me, Melissa held the kids on her lap, and I remembered how that photo came just days after I had secretly bailed them out of credit card debt, something I never told anyone, not even them, because I thought that's what love was. Invisible sacrifice. Now I saw it for what it was, a performance, a still image of a family that only existed as long as I stayed in my role, quiet, generous, and invisible. That night, I finally answered one of Kevin's texts. Not the most recent one, not even one about money. It was an old message he had sent months earlier, after I'd covered a car repair and he'd written, "Thanks, you're a lifesaver," followed by a laughing emoji and nothing else. I replied with just one sentence. "Do you even know what I gave up for you?" And then I turned off my phone. It was nearly midnight when headlights lit up my driveway. A car door slammed. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. Some part of me had been expecting this, maybe even wanting it. Not for reconciliation, but for confrontation, for the kind of raw, unfiltered honesty that only comes when the mask finally slips. And all that's left are two people who stopped pretending. Because sometimes, when a family turns on you, it's not the betrayal that breaks you, It's the realization that they never saw you clearly to begin with. When I opened the door, I didn't even flinch, because by that point, I had already rehearsed every possible version of this moment in my mind so many times that the reality of it, Kevin standing there with his jacket half-zipped, his hair uncombed, his face flushed with a cocktail of anger, shame, and panic, felt less like a confrontation and more like the final act in a play I had long since memorized. Every word, every breath, already etched somewhere behind my ribs, like a scar that knew how to ache even in silence. He didn't speak right away, just stood there shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like a teenager caught in a lie he didn't know how to talk his way out of. And for a long, heavy moment, we just stared at each other, two people who used to share Sunday morning cartoons and backyard treehouses now trapped in a staring contest, where the prize was simply who would look away first. "I didn't think it would go like this," he finally muttered. His voice cracked at the edges, too soft to be angry, but too proud to be honest. And the way he said it, like this was all some unfortunate misunderstanding instead of a slow-motion betrayal, nearly made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so damn predictable that even in collapse, Kevin couldn't take responsibility without wrapping it in ambiguity. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, not inviting him in, not pushing him away, just waiting, because for once in our lives, I wasn't going to do the emotional labor of getting us to the point. "What exactly did you think would happen?" I asked, my voice calm, low, almost kind, which is probably what unnerved him the most, because rage he could handle, tears he could deflect, but quiet composure from the sister he'd dismissed as irrelevant, that was unfamiliar terrain, and Kevin had never been good at navigating unfamiliar things. He looked down at his shoes, then up again, eyes glistening not with tears, but with the kind of raw exposure that hits when you realize the version of someone you built in your mind no longer exists. And maybe never did. "I thought you'd be mad," he said. "I thought maybe you'd pull away a bit, but not like this. Not cut us off completely. The kids." He stopped, swallowed, shook his head like he couldn't finish the thought, and I felt something sharp twist in my chest, because no matter how much I tried to steel myself, no matter how long I held the line, the mention of those kids, his kids, my niece and nephew, the ones I had watched grow from tantrums to teenage eye rolls, always cut a little too deep. "I didn't cut you off," I said, and this time my voice carried something harder. "I stopped funding you. There's a difference. You made it clear what I was worth to you. Not family, not a sister, not someone to include, just a line item in your monthly budget. And when that disappeared, you didn't ask why. You didn't check if I was okay. You went online and told the world I abandoned you." Kevin winced, and for the first time since I opened the door, I saw something that resembled recognition flash across his face. A kind of dawning comprehension that maybe, just maybe, the story he'd told himself, the one where he was the struggling dad and I was the bitter spinster with a martyr complex, didn't hold up when held against the facts. He stepped forward slightly, like he might try to come in, but I didn't move, and that was answer enough. He stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, and I wanted to believe him. Wanted to let those words be enough, because for so long I'd been starving for them, rationing out scraps of affection like they were currency. But the apology was thin, rushed, like it had been pulled from a script he didn't quite believe. And I knew that if I let it in now, it would only become another transaction, another moment where I swallowed my needs to preserve a peace that never really existed. So I said nothing. He stood there for a few more seconds, and when it became clear I wasn't going to hug him, invite him in, or offer him a path back into the warmth, his shoulders dropped in resignation. Not defeat. Kevin didn't do defeat, but something that looked a little like understanding, or at least the beginning of it. He nodded once, turned, walked down the steps, and got into his car without looking back. I closed the door slowly, not with the kind of dramatic finality you see in movies, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has chosen herself, Finally, after a lifetime of being the scaffolding for other people's lives. In the kitchen, the kettle had just finished boiling, and I poured the water into a mug, watching the steam rise like breath after a long, hard run. Outside, snow had started falling again. Not the pretty light flurries of December, but the heavy kind that makes everything feel quieter than it really is. I took my tea to the living room, sat down, and texted an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Someone I'd lost touch with in the chaos of caregiving, bill paying, and playing the part of the strong one. The message was simple. Free for dinner next week? And I hit send without overthinking it. Because if I had learned anything through this whole mess, it was that rebuilding doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it starts with one quiet decision to choose yourself. And yet, as I sat there in that silence, I couldn't help but wonder, was I cruel? Did I go too far? Should I have softened, forgiven, let the past be the past? Or was this the only way to finally make them see me as something more than a convenience? I don't have the answers, and maybe I never will. Maybe all I know is that sometimes the only way to remind people of your worth is to stop giving them discounts. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have opened that door wider, or would you have done what I did? And finally let it close.